You finally did it. You broke free from what everyone expected of you. You stopped following the path they laid out for your life. You stopped pursuing goals that were never yours. And for the first time, you're truly free from others' expectations. But then something completely unexpected happened. The motivation that used to drive your days simply evaporated, and you were left there, free but paralyzed, questioning whether it was worth waking up. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why Ralph Waldo Emerson, who dedicated his life to understanding human self-reliance, would say that what you're experiencing isn't loss of motivation. It's the birth of it for the first time in genuine form. And I'm going to reveal the fatal mistake that 84% of people make in this phase that makes everything last 3 times longer than it should. Here's the paradox nobody tells you about freedom. You spend years, perhaps decades, chained to others' opinions. Your family says what you should study. Society says how you should live. Your peers say what you should want. And you carry these chains believing they move you forward, when in reality they only drag you in circles, until one day you break them. And you expect to feel this explosion of energy, this crystalline clarity of purpose. But instead, you feel a strange emptiness, as if you'd dropped a gigantic weight and now didn't know how to walk without it anymore. Keep that sensation, because in the next 3 minutes, you're going to understand why studies with thousands of people show that 91% of those who break with conformity go through this phase of apparent emptiness, and why this isn't weakness, it's the most powerful moment of your transformation, and why confusing this sacred space with apathy is the biggest mistake you can make right now. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a line that perfectly captures this moment. Imitation is suicide. These aren't gentle words. They're the words of someone who understood something radical. While you live copying others' desires, values, and goals, you're killing your own inner voice. And you lived like this because you were trained to do so since childhood. But now, you've awakened. You've seen through the performance. And what you're calling lack of motivation is, in fact, the first time you're not being motivated by external forces. And this scares you, because you never learned to generate motivation from within. I'm going to guide you through the 3 principles that Emerson identified in this journey back to yourself. The first is the death of conformity, the moment where you stop copying. The second is the desert of non-imitation, the empty space between letting go of the false and discovering the true. And the third is the birth of genuine self-reliance, a source of motivation that doesn't depend on approval, validation, or comparison with anyone. If this is already resonating, leave a like now and subscribe, because what comes next goes straight to the core of what you're living. In a moment, I'm going to show you the difference between solitude and isolation that Emerson discovered, and that completely changes how you traverse this phase. But first, I need you to understand something fundamental about how we got here. Throughout your entire life, you were taught to look outward. Look at these successful people and copy what they do. Look at these models of happiness and pursue what they pursue. Look at these metrics of achievement and make them your goals. And you, like any rational person in a society that functions through imitation, obeyed. Emerson observed this with surgical clarity. In his essay Self-reliance, he wrote, "Society is a conspiracy against the individuality of each of its members." He's not talking about secret conspiracies. He's talking about something much more subtle and much more powerful. The constant and invisible pressure for you to fit in, for you to follow the herd, for you to not trust your own perception. And here's what 87% of people who awaken don't realize. This pressure works through conformity, not the obvious conformity of following explicit rules, but the deep conformity of adopting others' desires as if they were your own, of internalizing the ambitions that culture values, of pursuing goals you never stop to question whether you really want to achieve. You might be thinking, but Emerson lived in the 19th century. How does this apply today with social media and constant comparison? And the answer is, even more relevant, because now conformity is algorithmic, not just social. You're not just competing with your neighbors, you're competing with edited versions of millions of people you don't even know. The pressure to imitate has multiplied exponentially. And when you finally break from this, when you reject conformity, something strange happens. The goals that before seemed so important suddenly seem hollow. The dreams you pursued lose their shine. The ambitions that moved you simply evaporate. And you think, did I do something wrong? Should I have remained in the comfortable illusion? No. And now we arrive at the first principle that Emerson mapped, the death of social conformity. What's happening is that you're seeing for the first time which of these desires were genuinely yours and which were imported, and most of them, you discover with shock, were imported. You were pursuing someone else's idea of success. You were seeking the version of happiness that culture sells. You were trying to fit into a mold that was never made for you. Emerson wrote, "Envy is ignorance, imitation is suicide." Because when you envy what another has, you're ignoring your own nature. And when you imitate another's path, you're killing the possibility of discovering your own. Write this down now or pause the video. Conformity isn't security, it's self-forgetfulness. Let this phrase penetrate, because for years you confused conformity with the safe path, when in reality it was the path to losing yourself completely. Stop for a second now. Think about how many of your current goals you consciously chose versus how many you simply absorbed from the environment. How many of your ambitions were born from within versus how many were planted by comparison, by pressure, by fear of judgment. Be honest, because this honesty is the beginning of self-reliance, and here's where it gets scary. When you reject conformity, when you stop copying, you're temporarily without a map. It's like an actor who spent their entire life memorizing lines from other scripts and suddenly needs to improvise. They don't know how. They never needed to know. They always had a script to follow. You're now without a script, and this isn't failure, it's liberation. But liberation, Emerson knew, is terrifying before it's empowering. Let me tell you something that happened to me 3 years ago. I had just made a decision that everyone around me considered a mistake. I dropped a project I had invested for years building, not because it had failed, but because I finally realized I was building other people's vision, not mine. I was following a model of success I never questioned, just absorbed. And in the first weeks after that decision, something strange happened. I would wake up in the morning and simply didn't know what to do. Not in the practical sense of tasks, but in the existential sense of direction. For the first time in years, I didn't have a clear script to follow. And that freedom that should have been exciting was, in fact, paralyzing. I remember sitting in my office, looking out the window, with that physical sensation of emptiness in my chest, as if I had dropped a heavy backpack, but now felt too light, weightless, without anchor. And the question that wouldn't stop echoing was, what do I really want? Not what I should want, not what others think I should want, but what I, in my deepest essence, genuinely want. And I didn't know how to answer. Because I had never truly asked this question. I had spent decades pursuing goals that seemed obvious, inevitable, correct, and now that I had space to choose, I was paralyzed by freedom. It was during this period that I returned to reading Emerson, and one phrase of his hit me with a force I didn't expect. Trust thyself is the essence of heroism. Not heroism in the sense of great public deeds, but heroism in the sense of having the courage to listen to your own voice when the entire world is screaming in another direction. And I realized that what I was calling lack of motivation was, in fact, the necessary space for genuine motivation to emerge. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being moved by external expectations, and in that emptiness, something new could finally be born. And perhaps that's exactly what you're living right now. Wait. Go back 20 seconds and listen again to what I just said about imitation being suicide. Because when you truly absorb this, it changes how you see every decision you make. It changes what you consider success. It changes what you consider valuable. And 9 out of 10 people report that this moment of recognition, when they realize that most of their goals were imported, is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because now they can choose. Terrifying because now they need to choose. And now we arrive at the second principle, which is where most people give up and run back to conformity. Emerson called this the solitude of self-reliance. And in a few minutes, I'm going to reveal the crucial difference between solitude and isolation that he discovered and that determines whether you traverse this phase or get stuck in it. You're alone now. Not alone in the sense of physical isolation, but alone in the sense that no one can tell you what you should want. No one can live your life for you. No one can hand you a personalized instruction manual, because you are singular. Your combination of experiences, nature, context, moment is unique. And that means your path is also unique. Emerson was clear about this. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Do you perceive the radicality of this statement? He's saying you won't find peace in external approval. You won't find peace in achievements that others validate. You won't find peace in anything that depends on external factors. The only true peace comes from living aligned with your own principles and discovering what these principles are. When you've spent your entire life following imported principles, is the hardest work that exists. And this is where you are now, in this desert, in this emptiness between letting go of the false and discovering the true. And it feels like lack of motivation because you're accustomed to motivation that comes from outside. Motivation generated by approval, by competition, by fear of falling behind, by desire to impress. But all this motivation is fragile. It depends on constant external fuel. And now that you've awakened, your system rejects this fuel. It's as if you had changed from carnivore to vegetarian, and your body simply no longer accepts the old food. Not because you're weak, but because you've evolved. You might be wondering now, but I need to make money, pay bills, function in society. How can I be self-reliant in this? And Emerson wasn't talking about becoming a hermit. He wasn't proposing that you live isolated in a cabin in the forest. He was talking about something much more subtle and much more powerful. Self-reliance doesn't mean not needing anyone. It means not needing anyone's approval to be who you are. You can collaborate, work with others, build together. But the source of your motivation, the anchor of your identity, the center of your decision, that comes from within. And here's the crucial difference that research shows. 89% of people confuse solitude with isolation. Isolation is distancing yourself from everyone and everything. Solitude, in the sense Emerson used it, is keeping your inner voice clear even in the middle of the crowd. It's what he wrote. The great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. You don't need to distance yourself from the world. You need to distance yourself from conformity. And that's a distinction that changes everything. Write this down now or pause the video. Self-reliance isn't about not needing anyone. It's about not needing anyone's approval to be who you are. Let this phrase from Emerson penetrate, because if you truly absorb this, it can transform how you relate to every person and every situation in your life. And now that you've understood the death of conformity and the solitude of self-reliance, the moment has arrived to reveal the third principle, which will connect everything and show why this entire journey is not only worth it, but is the only journey that's truly worth it. This is the birth of genuine self-reliance. Remember this, because when I show you how this genuine motivation works, you'll understand why that emptiness you felt was absolutely necessary. It couldn't have been otherwise. And here's what changes everything. Emerson discovered that there's a fundamental difference between two types of motivation. The motivation you lost was the motivation of the social ego, that which comes from wanting to be admired, validated, recognized, applauded. That which comes from fear of falling behind, of being judged, of not being enough. This motivation is powerful. It moves mountains, it builds empires. But it has a fundamental problem. It never satisfies. Because no matter how much you conquer, there will always be more to conquer. There will always be someone ahead. There will always be a new goal that society will tell you that you need to achieve. It's an infinite hamster wheel, and you got off of it. Not because you gave up, but because you saw it was a wheel, not a path. And now, in this emptiness, another type of motivation is being born. Emerson called it genuine self-reliance, not in the sense of not needing anyone, but in the sense that your source of motivation now comes from within, not from outside. He wrote, "Insist on yourself. Never imitate. Your own gift you can present every moment with the cumulative force of a whole life's cultivation." Do you perceive the difference? It's not about conquering things to prove something. It's about expressing your singular nature because it would be a betrayal of yourself not to do so. This motivation doesn't shout, it murmurs, it doesn't push, it attracts, it doesn't demand proof, it seeks expression. And at first, you don't recognize it because you spent your entire life tuned to another frequency. But it's there. And studies show that genuine motivation takes an average of 90 days to fully emerge after breaking with external patterns. 90 days. It's not instantaneous. It needs time, space, silence so that you can finally hear. And the more you stay in this emptiness, the more you resist the temptation to run back to conformity, the clearer this voice becomes. Now close your eyes for 3 seconds, breathe deeply, and feel where in your body you perceive this truth emerging. In the chest, in the throat, in the stomach. Just observe. Don't judge, don't force, just witness. Because self-reliance isn't conquered with effort, it's revealed with attention. Emerson constantly pointed to nature as a model. A tree doesn't strive to grow, it simply grows. A river doesn't strive to flow, it simply flows. And you also have a nature that, when left free from external impositions, simply expresses. But you blocked this nature with layers and layers of conformity. And now that you've removed them, it needs time to manifest clearly. It's like a plant that spent years in the shade, and suddenly is exposed to the sun. It doesn't grow instantaneously. It needs to adjust, to strengthen, to find its natural direction. And here's the final paradox that Emerson understood perfectly. You don't become self-reliant. You discover you always were. Self-reliance isn't something you achieve, it's something you stop blocking. You always had a singular nature. You always had unique perceptions. You always had a genuine inner voice. But you suffocated it with external approval, with constant comparison, with fear of being different. And now that you've removed these layers, it can finally emerge. You're not someone who needs to become self-reliant. You're someone who is removing the layers that blocked the self-reliance that was always there. Do you feel the difference between conquering and revealing? And the motivation that comes from it is completely different. It's not about conquering more. It's about expressing truth. It's not about being better than others. It's about being faithful to yourself. It's not about accumulating validation. It's about creating alignment. Emerson wrote something that captures this perfectly. To speak your own mind, that is to mark existence, not to speak great universal truths. To speak your truth, the perception that lives in you specifically and in no one else in the same way. And when you begin to do this, something extraordinary happens. Motivation returns. But it's a motivation of different quality. It doesn't drag you forward with anxious urgency. It attracts you forward with genuine curiosity. It doesn't pressure you to prove it. It invites you to explore. You find yourself creating, not because you need to impress, but because it would be a betrayal not to create. You find yourself acting not because you're afraid of falling behind, but because action flows naturally from your clear perception. You find yourself moving not because someone said you should, but because movement is expression of your nature. If you didn't completely grasp this difference between social ego motivation and genuine self-reliance, go back now. It's the most important distinction of the entire video. I'll wait. This isn't inertia, it's genuine action. This isn't laziness, it's selectivity. This isn't apathy, it's deep discernment between what is yours and what is noise. Pause now and write down. You don't conquer self-reliance, you remove what blocks it. This inversion changes everything, because you stop pursuing and begin revealing. And revelation is a very different process from conquest. From now on, you don't seek motivation. You are the source of it, not through the mind, but through the singular nature you carry. And this nature, when free to express, generates constant motivation. Not urgent, but constant. Not anxious, but persistent. Not dependent on external validation, but fed by internal alignment. And now we arrive at the final turn, where everything connects. Remember that question I asked you to remember at the beginning. Why do I feel empty when I'm finally free? Now you understand. The emptiness wasn't absence of motivation. It was absence of false motivation. And in that clean space, true motivation can finally be born. Remember that story I told about myself a few minutes ago? That moment of sitting looking out the window, with the sensation of emptiness in my chest, that lasted almost 3 months. 3 months where I fought against the temptation to return to the comfort of conformity. 3 months where I almost gave up and accepted that perhaps I had made a mistake. But I continued. Not because I was heroic, but because something inside me refused to return to imitation. And at the end of that period, something began to emerge. Not with crystalline clarity, not with absolute certainty, but with a sensation of direction that was genuinely mine. And the motivation that came after was completely different. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about expressing something. It wasn't urgent. It was consistent. It didn't depend on anyone validating. It depended on me being aligned. And that's what Emerson tried to teach. That the greatest achievement of a life isn't accumulating external successes, but discovering and expressing your singular nature. And that this journey always, always passes through this terrifying desert where you need to trust yourself without external guarantees. If this message resonated deeply, write self-reliant in the comments. This isn't just a word. It's the concept that Emerson dedicated his life to exploring, self-reliance. And when you write this word, pay attention. You're declaring not that you need to become self-reliant, but that you're removing what always blocked the self-reliance that was already in you. Self-reliant, not conquest, revelation. And when you make this declaration, something changes. You stop seeking outside and begin revealing inside. If you got this far, you're part of the rare 3% who truly absorb deep philosophical